Good evening, guys. Welcome back to Ansarkari. So let's start with our today's discussion for 13th of December. The first news piece is talking about the India and the Chinese soldiers. They clashed near Arunachal border. So this is the second incident after the 2020 incidents at Galwan Valley that we saw, which led to uh, killing of 20 Indian soldiers. And this has happened in the Tawang sector. So you can find out its location on the atlas. And as a follow-up to this incident, commanders on both the sides they held a flag meeting to discuss the issue in accordance with the structured mechanisms to restore peace and tranquility. So we need to find out a permanent solution to this problem and ensure that such incidents are not repeated in future. Talking about an economy's news, so we see that retail inflation it falls below the 6% mark for the first time in this year, and there are two factors responsible for this. So it has fallen to 5.88%, and the first factor is the cooling vegetable prices, and the second is cooling down of the edible oil prices, which drove down the inflation to 5.88% in the month of November. So we can say a sigh of relief, and we are seeing that inflation is cooling down, and this falls below the target range of RBI of for inflation, which stands at 2 to 6%, and the target for inflation rate is 4%. Then moving ahead, we'll take up the editorial section. So in editorials, this article is talking about instead of focusing upon the individual policy steps that we are taking, we need to focus upon the steps which are more emphasizing on the entire population when we talk about the public health. So we need to curb this individualism that we see. So a failure to examine and interpret the public health problem from a population perspective is leading to ineffective and unsustainable solutions as far as the complex public health problems they are concerned. And this is obvious for the problems such as, so the first example that we are taking here is to address the problem of undernutrition, which is massive in India, for which individualist solutions such as micronutrient supplementation and food fortification they have been proposed as solutions in view of the sustainable approaches such as strengthening of the PDS system, supplementary nutrition programs, and health services. So the approaches or the solutions that we are implementing ensuring at curbing this undernutrition, they are individualistic, and the examples are also here that we are ensuring food fortification, we are ensuring micronutrient supplementation. Instead, we should focus upon the approaches which cover the population as a whole. So that would include we need to ensure the strengthening of the PDS system. Second would be supplementary nutrition programs, and third would be strengthening our health services. So that's how we should go about at tackling this problem of undernutrition. Now, the second example is this article is talking about is the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, which falls under the Ayushman Bharat. So it is the largest health insurance scheme in the country, which covers the hospitalization expenses for a family of which amounts to rupees 5 lakh a year. So the goal is there to ensure a free curative care services for all kinds of hospitalization services so that there is no financial burden on the beneficiary, right? So this is the aim of the scheme, and what is not talked about in this entire scheme is the need for hospitalization services per year for any population. Here again the scheme is talking about providing the health coverage for a particular family. So it means we are talking about an individual, and that stands at rupees 5 lakh a year. So instead, every individual is given an assurance that if there is a need for hospitalization expenses, the scheme will cover the expenses. So again, it is an assurance to the individual, and this is an individualistic response to the problem of hospitalization expenditure faced by populations. So when we look at the data from the National Sample Survey Organization, which was for 75th round, it shows that on an average, only 3% of the total population in India had an episode of hospitalization in a year. So, given this data, Ideally, the government it needs to ensure healthcare services and facilities to only 3 to 5% of the population to cover all the hospitalization needs of a population, and this is population based healthcare planning. So given the data, we need to take steps and measures, the policy decisions which are catering to the entire population, and saving that expenditure we can utilize it somewhere else. Then the approach to vaccination, so this is the third example. Here we'll be talking about vaccination which was given for COVID-19. So the approach to vaccination for COVID-19 has been similar, wherein unlike other vaccination programs, it was evident that a COVID-19 vaccine, it cannot prevent people from getting the disease, but it will only reduce the hospitalization and deaths in the event of contracting COVID-19. And it was also evident that around 20% of the total COVID-19 positive cases, they needed medical attention, only 5% needed hospitalization, and 1 to 2% of the people they needed intensive care unit support. So given again the data to effectively manage the COVID-19 pandemic, what was needed was to have the primary, secondary, and the tertiary healthcare services and facilities to manage the above proportion of the cases. So we had the data, and effectively to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, are different, you can say, healthcare services sector, they had to deal with the cases accordingly. And instead, by focusing on a vaccination program for the entire population, it is again an assurance and a promise to every individual that even if you get COVID-19, you will not need hospitalization and you will not die. So that's how our vaccination program went. So propagating individualism has always been a characteristic feature of a consumerist society, as every individual can then be a potential customer in the face of risk and susceptibility. So that's how things go on, and all forms of individualistic approaches in public health, they need to be resisted to safeguard its original principles of practice, which are population, prevention, and social justice. So that's how this article is basically talking about. It is trying to convey the thing that we need to curb the individualistic steps that we are taking given the different health problems and the public health problems that we face, and we need to look at them from the perspective of tackling that problem from the population perspective. And also, given the data, we need to have a data driven approach. So that's how we should go about it. And talking about the disaster preparedness, so we recently saw that cyclone Mandis, it made a landfall near Mamallapuram in Chennai, and it has also been called the textbook cyclone. So we need to be ready for the worst when it comes to disaster management and disaster preparedness. And this time we saw that the governments and agencies, they have shown better preparedness for cyclones. So what are the steps that are need to be taken when we are talking about better preparedness for any natural disaster or even a man-made disaster? So the noteworthy thing this time was the way the official machinery in the state of Tamil Nadu stirred the disaster management system, and a response of the administration was also swift, and the common man's life was hardly disrupted this time. So that is one thing, and the state government's coordination with the IMD and its preparedness in tackling the post landfall situation also made a difference to the situation this time. So that is the second thing. And thirdly, technology too, both in terms of the forecast and information dissemination, has been playing a key role. So authorities, that is the state governments and the IMD department, should continuously work to improve their ways of functioning, making use of the modern technology that we have and helping people to be ready to face a natural disaster. So I'll repeat the three things: the way the official machinery responds, and the response of administration needs to be swift, and common man's ensure that common man's life is hardly disrupted because of a natural disaster. And thirdly becomes basically sorry, these were the first the that was the first point, and the second point was coordination between state government and IMD. Third was using the modern technology that we have. Then moving ahead, so here we have discussed this topic a number of times. Again, we'll just go through it in brief. So, why there is a friction between the government and the judiciary? So, we know that it is because of the collegium system. So, the current conflict, it has two components. The one is the government's repeated public criticism in the collegium system on the grounds that it is opaque. So government obviously it favors the NJAC system, and it says that the collegium system is opaque. And the other concern, that is the second point, is the ping pong battle between the collegium and the government over the names that are being recommended for the appointment in the constitutional courts. So the government, despite the provision that once though the recommendations they are reiterated by the Supreme Court, so the government has no other way but to appoint those recommended persons to the respective post. But the government, despite that, it has again sent back those recommendations to the Supreme Court, and it is not ready to appoint those personalities. So Supreme Court said that the collegium system is the law as it exists now, and we need to function according to that only. And the government has kept collegium recommendations pending for no apparent reason, and the court has accused the government of not appointing the persons who are not palatable to it. So that is the thing. And if you want, you can go through this article yourself, because we have talked about this topic a number of times, so we are just talking about in brief. Talking about the factors of production, so this topic is from economy, so you should be knowing, you should be clear about the meaning, what are factors of production. So these are those factors which are thought to be as the basic building blocks of production in an economy, which are, we can say, the fundamentals, the foundation factors which are required for carrying out the production activity in any economy, which lead to the growth and development of it. So conventionally talking, land, labor, and capital, they are widely considered to be the three main factors of production, and these are absolutely necessary for the production of any good or service. But more recently, we see that entrepreneurship is also considered by many to be the fourth factor of production, and it is believed to be the most crucial factor of production that brings together the other three factors, that is land, labor, and capital. So some heterodox economists, they also consider land, labor, and time to be the three primary factors of production, and they believe that capital and entrepreneurship to be the secondary factors of production, in the sense that these factors they are derived by first combining land, labor, and time. So that is one view. And talking about the public or the private ownership of these factors of production, so there are two schools of thought. The first one is the Marxist school of thought. So the ownership of the factors of production, it has been a matter of intense debate, and the Marxist schools of economists, they have argued that the factors of production, they need to be collectively owned by the state. So they argue and support for the public ownership of the factors of production, and they believe that the private ownership of factors of production will lead to exploitation of labor and mismanagement of the scarce resources that we have. So they argue that state planners, they can overcome both these problems by framing a proper collective economic plan. And the second school of thought, who belong to the group of free market school of thought, they strongly believe in the private ownership of all the factors of production because of the incentives it offers to the resource owners. So here you should be knowing about this. Moving ahead, so Rajya Sabha has passed the futuristic energy conservation bill. So with the clearance to this bill, it sets the mandate use of the non-fossil resources, which includes green hydrogen, green ammonia, biomass, and ethanol for energy and feedstock, and establish the carbon markets in the country, that is in India. And also, you should be knowing about the governing council of Bureau of Energy Efficiency. You should be knowing about its like composition, so you can find out more about it. And talking about rare diseases, so the benefits of the policy on rare diseases are not reaching the patient. So The policy was it was implemented in March 2021, and under it ensures a funding support of rupees 50 lakh per patient with diseases which are classified as rare disease. So find out what are rare diseases, and there are certain examples which includes lysosomal storage disorders, Gawker disease, Pompe disease, MPS 1 and 2, and Fabry disease. So all these are examples of rare diseases, and there is also one more category which is ultra rare genetic condition. So you need to find out what are the basis of identifying or classifying any disease as ultra rare genetic conditions. All right. So this becomes important, and this can be asked in PT. So moving ahead, and you can also find out more about the features of this policy. Now the government has launched a scheme which is called the Pradhan Mantri Adi Adarsh Gram Yojana, under which it aims to turn around 36,428 villages as model tribal villages. So you can cite this example, this scheme, as a measure and a step taken by government to ensure tribal welfare, and this is going to cover 40% of the total scheduled tribe population in India. Then moving ahead, from the business page, we see that in the October, the industrial output it contracts by 4%, and the factors which led to this was the 5.6% drop in the manufacturing output. Second was the minimal growth in the electricity generation. Third was contraction in the capital goods. So all this they points to that private sector investment it has not picked up. So this is what the economists say. So three factors, that is drop in the manufacturing output, then minimal growth in the electricity generation, third was contraction in the capital goods. So however, it was for the period, it was for the month of October. And on the other side, we see that the net direct tax revenue has grown by 24.3% when we compare this figure with the previous year period. And we see that it has touched to rupees 8.77 lakh crore rupees by November 30. So that is the figure we have. Like, obviously, we've been talking about this, that we are seeing mixed figures and mixed performance in certain sectors. So that is it for today. Thank you for joining Ansarkari, and I hope you've understood the topics and the key important points that we discussed today. And do not forget to subscribe to our channel. See you soon.